Good afternoon and welcome to WIRRED's live living room sessions. On Tuesday, CPRI's Jen Ward Clark engaged in an enlightening discussion with Veronica Prado, energy specialist of the IDB, about the trajectory of renewable energy here in Barbados and in the wider Caribbean. I highly recommend that you catch the recorded session on WIRRED's YouTube channel. Remember, living room sessions are now being streamed live to YouTube, so be sure to check us out there to click and subscribe. Join us every Tuesday and Thursday at 1 p.m. for the month of June as we continue to deep dive into the topics of regenerative agriculture, climate change, building biodiversity, and renewable energy. My name is Kiesha Farnum, and I am from Walker's Institute for Regenerative Research, Education, and Design. And we are pleased to bring you this series in collaboration with our education partners, the Caribbean Permaculture Research Institute, CPRI, and powered by the Inter-American Development Bank. Today's session promises to be equally as interesting as we delve into the idea of the Great 2020 Acceleration. What is it? And how has it impacted the Caribbean and will impact the Caribbean in the future? To lead us in this discussion, we have Anaitée Mills. Anaitée is the consultant advisor of the Office of the Prime Minister of Jamaica, where she provides expert input on climate finance, transparency, and resiliency, as well as high-level coordination support for international climate events and engagement with international climate funds. Anaitée has worked across the region in energy and climate change with the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Resources Institute, and governments in Latin America and the Caribbean. Welcome, Anaitée. We are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you, Kiesha. I'm very happy to be here as well.
Excellent. Where are you joining us from today?
I am here joining you from beautiful Kingston, Jamaica.
Oh, excellent. Is the weather as hot as it is here in Barbados?
Yes.
I swear, it feels like it's September already. It is so ridiculously hot. It's incredible.
Listen, so, can you believe we're going into June already?
I know. Somebody said to me recently that this year has been the slowest and the fastest year, all at the same time. And I think that's a really good description. It's an excellent description. Well, Anaitée, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I mean, first of all, well, thank you. Thank you, Kiesha. Thank you to the team at WIRRED and CPRI and also the IDB for convening this space. I think it's a wonderful space. I think it has given a lot of people the opportunity to speak up and to share ideas and gain some new knowledge. I know that I have gained tremendous knowledge in the last 2 months with a variety of webinars and virtual engagements, and this is definitely a cherry on top of the ice cream. And I thank you again for inviting me to join this discussion. So my role, as you described it, I am now a consultant advisor for climate finance at the Office of the Prime Minister. Mm-hmm. I've been consulting for the government of Jamaica for quite some time now, almost a year now. And before that, I spent almost 10 years working at the Inter-American Development Bank on both energy and climate change.
Yeah.
So by all accounts, I'm a professional in international development, in sustainable development, and also what I call a student expert. I am still learning. There's so much knowledge right now that I am here to share what I've learned and to also hear what other people may want to share as well. So this is a little bit about myself for now.
Well, for me, that's the best part of any career, that ability to always just keep learning. And I mean, in doing these living room sessions, and interacting with different speakers as I've gone through the information, I am learning too. So this has really been an incredible learning experience all the way around. Well, jumping into today's topic, which I found quite fascinating as I started to deep dive into the rabbit hole, that is, the Great Acceleration. And then we fine-tune it into the Great 2020 Acceleration. But let's start off, for our viewers who may not have an idea of what we're talking about in terms of what is the Great Acceleration? Let's if you can give us an idea of what's the Great Acceleration, and then we move into the Great 2020 Acceleration
Mhm.
and how it has influenced advances in traditional development and green
Mhm.
development.
Absolutely. I think it's definitely critical for all of us to understand where we're coming from and how we are and how we arrived into the world that we have today.
Yeah,
The Great Acceleration first began back in the 17th, 18th centuries when the big industrial revolution started with the economic growth as we know it, right?
right,
When, the industrial revolution was stimulated large scale investments in industries, stimulated the whole economic and social transformation of the world. It marked the growth of factories, of the use of steel, of iron, the use of coal plants, and the increase in the use of fossil fuels.
right.
Of course, that was excellent at the time because that's what the world needed. It was a time for a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas, a lot of industries that were, coming on stream, and people needed work just as we are today. And needed
Mhm.
work. There was a lot of labor, a lot of people ready to go into coal plants, into the start of the electricity. And so this great acceleration that happened back in these centuries and then move on into the second wave of acceleration, which was in the 19th centuries, when we started or the world started to experience the a larger use of technology, of an expansion of the roads and railway, the movement of people and cultures, and
Yeah,
the electrification really started. And that is basically, in a nutshell, how this great acceleration has happened in the last decades, which has continued to date, and which delivers the world that we have today, a world that is carbon intensive, that uses a lot of fossil fuels, that has big industries, a lot of demand, a lot of supply, a lot of consumption, a world that demands a lot of resources from everybody, from all countries,
yeah,
uh, a lot of also environmental degradation, past urbanization and the population growth,
hmm,
a lot of increased use and need of food, consumption. So this is the world we're living in today.
yeah,
And I thought it was interesting to take a step back because I think the generations today do not think too much about what happened before and
yeah.
how we ended up. It's kind of a little bit of gaining a little bit of awareness on what prompted this economic growth and hyper acceleration that we in the world have been experiencing for many, many years now.
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting things, as you start to read and you really understand the context of how development has taken place over time. You started off with, as you said, something that was needed at that point in time, and it wasn't 100% bad. You hear a lot of people talk about where we are right now, and they're just like, everything's bad, the whole thing's bad, everything's bad. But where did it start? It didn't start off with everything being bad. It started off with the
Hmm.
need for development, the need for jobs, the need to create food, the need for countries to develop. But what happened is that spiraled out of control.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's
absolutely.
a complete spiral out of control. So it wasn't the actions in and of themselves, but it was the fact that those actions had spiraled out of control and have led us exactly. And it's a perfect word, accelerated, right? When you think about
Hmm.
accelerated, you think about just speeding up and going really, really, really fast.
Hmm.
So it's
Hmm.
accelerated us to the point where we are right now. And so when we look at that acceleration and we come to 2020, how does
Hmm.
that fit into the whole narrative?
So it's so interesting because the world and the humans, we are adaptive, highly adaptive, and highly resourceful. and we see the opportunities and we just run with it, which the world has been doing for decades.
Mm-hmm.
As you well pointed out, at that time, that's what the world needed. And so the question is, what do we need today? So we are now in the doors of what I will call, many people will call, another great acceleration, which is the what we're living today. We are in the midst of this pandemic of the coronavirus affecting many countries, if not all countries in the world. We are in the midst of a change and a transformation in the way we do things and the way we behave and consume and use our resources. So the fact that we are in such a transformational phase right now poses the question on, all right, so where are we moving, or in what direction should we move in moving forward? How are we going to use this transformation time and this acceleration that is going to happen as a result of the world and the global response to this pandemic? The response to the pandemic requires, and we have seen it, different governments and different leaderships and different ideas on how to respond. Some of them questionable, some others very timely and appropriate, but also very contextual, very, very, fit. One solution doesn't fit everybody. And we know it in and it doesn't fit for all. It's not a fit for all. The Caribbean is a whole different context. Even different countries in the Caribbean have different contexts.
Yeah,
so
you're so right.
We cannot place ourselves in the same basket and say, oh, we're just gonna respond the same as Trinidad and Tobago, or the same as San Lucia or Dominica. Everybody has a different context. What we do share in the Caribbean is the stresses that we have to deal on a normal basis, which is high debt, because we have to deal with a lot of natural disasters, a lot of vulnerability and risks, and historically we have responded to that recovery, or those recovery efforts, with more debt. So we are already indebted countries with very limited economic resources to respond to the global pandemic. We are also,
vulnerable to climate change.
Vulnerable, yes.
And we have a hurricane season that's coming up just now. I mean, it's on the heels of this. I mean, I think one of the things that really strikes me about this period of time, it being global is one thing, which is unprecedented. But the fact that it is now influencing every single sector. When you look at the acceleration that has happened in the past, there were some sectors that were more influenced than others. And, it was kind of like a gradual influence. So, you have more industry, then of course, because of industries, people now need more food, they now need more, and there's kind of a gradual acceleration. With this era that we're in right now, this space of time that we're in right now, every single thing is affected. Economic growth, population, foreign direct investment, energy consumption, telecommunications, transportation. Every single thing has been just kind of pushed, right, in a direction. And I think that segues really well into the other part of our discussion, and thinking about the green stimulus and, versus business as usual economic recovery, right? And we're hearing a lot of people saying, listen, we can't go back to business as usual. There is no such thing as business as usual anymore. And so the question then looks at, green stimulus versus business as usual economic recovery. How can governments harness this economic recovery period, or the plans, in order to boost the low carbon trends that we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, that is a very critical question, and that is where I think everybody has a bit of responsibility in order to hold our leaders accountable on what decisions they're going to take today, because those decisions will continue impacting us today, in the years to come, and our generations to come, just as the decisions taken back in the 18th, 17th century are affecting us today, especially in the Caribbean countries. We are today 10 years of from 2030, which is a critical year in achieving the targets of global temperature that we have set and we have a science-based that limits the global warming and somehow, or to a certain extent, at least ensures our survival in the
Yeah.
Caribbean, right? And in other Pacific islands and other vulnerable islands. So we are 10 years from that goal. That's 2030. And
Yeah.
the scientists, which we have seen during the pandemic, every time I see, leaders not listening to science, epidemiologists, I say, hey, welcome to the climate battle, because this is scientifically evidenced what we want to achieve and why we need to achieve it in the next 10 years,
Yeah.
because we haven't done it in the past. We missed the opportunity with the global the global financial crisis in 2008. There was, that crisis is comparable a little bit right now. Maybe coronavirus is a much bigger crisis, but
Yeah.
definitely the 2008 financial crisis has some lessons learned on the decisions taken at that time to use that recovery into what's going to be next on how are we going to grow or build back and develop in moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, so the decisions taken among those recovery plans are, and what the governments or our leaders need to do is, okay, where are the opportunities and how are we going to ensure, now that we know how vulnerable we are in terms of debt, in terms of climate, and now in pandemics and health and other disruptions that we didn't know about but will likely continue happening, then how can we plan and devise a way into resiliency, into minimizing the impacts on our economy? Because the impact on the economic is, at the end of the day, what affects every aspect of our livelihoods, the social education. You see the kids going back to not being able to go to school. A lot of people in the tourism sector in the Caribbean, we're highly dependent on the tourism, without a job right now. So this is the time when either the governments, go to the usual status quo investments that do not achieve or not help achieve the climate goals, but maybe generate some immediate activity to reopen the economy and generate that productive activity that is needed right now,
Yeah.
or climate considerations and alignment with sustainable development goals and many other frameworks that the United Nations, that all the countries have already agreed upon,
Yeah.
can be considered and aligned, so the decisions are, and the investments that are going to be made in different sectors and key sectors. It doesn't have to be everywhere. It doesn't have to be a 100% green stimulus, and that you have to dig into the climate considerations of every single activity. But there are some key sectors, such as energy, and Veronica was very eloquent on Tuesday in describing that, on the opportunities of investing in a higher deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency. And at the end of the day, which is not, for some reason, there's not much belief and faith in the capacity of green investments to generate jobs, which is what we all and the governments want right now.
The thing is, when we look at, this pandemic, some experts say that there's no war, no recession, no other pandemic that has had the kind of dramatic impact on emissions, or CO2s all over the CO2 emissions all over the world that COVID-19 has had over these last few months. And I mean, you see tons of articles on the BBC and other news sources showing, the drop in CO2 emissions across the world in developed countries, as well as developing countries. And so the idea is, I mean, we're still not going to meet our targets for emissions until we reach net zero. That's the reality. So how do we sustain? Yeah, how do we sustain some of this? How do we sustain some of the drops that we've seen but then also provide economic activity for persons to be able to continue living, right?
Right.
And so now would be the time to diversify, as you would have mentioned, particularly with renewable energy, particularly for our region, the time is ripe, if you want to call it that. The time is now to be able to have some of those interventions. I mean, but when we look at the different economic sectors, so you mentioned renewable energy, but are there any which renewable sectors do you see having the greatest potential for leapfrogging into the future?
So I think it's important to get in the mindset of prime ministers and governments and presidents right now. Right now, they need speed. They need speed. They need labor-intensive activities, and they need a strong co-benefits. So, for example, energy. If you jump into really scaling up and expanding energy efficiency in residential, in public buildings, in industries and commerce,
Right.
you will have jobs there. Jobs are generated for energy efficiency, for transforming, the auditing and transforming the whole makeup of buildings to make them more energy efficient. Then transport, of course, is another low-hanging fruit. As you well pointed out, there has been a significant drop in emissions because we've been stuck at home. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to drive anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the awareness that we have to also, try to keep even after the COVID crisis hopefully passes and we can reestablish some level of normalcy in our lives. We have to, remind ourselves, do I really need to move, or do I really need to circulate in my car right now, or not? Those kind of decisions you have to make, and then the government can invest in road resiliency, expanding and maintaining roads in our countries. We have a lot of problems because of flooding and sea level rise. So flooding is going to continue being a problem, and right now is the perfect time to tackle that problem in increasing the resiliency of the road network.
Yeah.
And that generates jobs, speed, and high labor intensive. Then we have water, water efficiency, storage, the water network, the flood protection I was talking about. Then forestry, Barbados has a fantastic planting initiative, just as Jamaica. The Prime Minister of Jamaica announced this 3 million, no, one tree
1 million
for each Jamaican. So it's 3 million. 1 million in the next 3 years? No, it's 3 million. Well, it's a lot of trees.
Well, in Barbados, we have 1 million trees starting 2020. So it's a long-term goal. The government of Barbados has set our own tree planting program, 1 tree for every Bajan at WIRRED. We are counting all of our trees towards the overall government count. And so we're working with them to make sure that we meet this long-term goal of planting 1 million trees. It's ambitious, but the only how you get anywhere is with ambition.
Yes,
you have to set goals that are ambitious. One of the things in thinking about leapfrogging that I find quite interesting is that, a lot of the times as developing countries, we just automatically look at the developed world and we try to set a trajectory for whatever course that they took. But there are ways for us to look at how we develop and become, more developed without having to go through the same pattern that they took, right? And of course, in going through that pattern, put ourselves through the same problems and create even more problems. A good example of that is if you think about the cell phone networks in like Africa, right?
Mhm.
And how they're now looking at using renewable energy as a way to power the cell phone networks in Africa, versus going the traditional way that the whole telecommunications industry would
Mhm.
have gone in the past, right? So just looking for new ways that you can rapidly get things done within a new scope, new structure, so that
Mhm.
developing countries do have an opportunity to develop. Because you do sometimes hear people say, "Oh, well, developing countries are way behind. How are we ever going to catch up if we have to, if we can't do the same things that the developed
Mhm.
countries did?" But we can catch up, and there are ways to do that, as you were mentioning.
Yeah, and the question is, what are we trying to catch up to?
Exactly.
We have, again, it's not a one fit for all development. It shouldn't be.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the great, learnings or realizations that I have come across in my COVID, coma, learning, is that we can set the pace of the way we want to develop.
Yeah.
We can set the pace on how we want to grow in our GDP. These indicators that are set by the international community and the developed countries
Yeah.
may not make sense to us anymore.
Exactly.
And then, yes, we want to develop, yes, we want to attain the quality of life that we see in other countries, but we have to feed it to our reality and our communities,
Yeah.
and that requires a lot of involvement also at that local government level and with communities, with the average man really, providing that kind of guidance to where we're moving towards to.
Yeah.
We have this here in Jamaica. The Prime Minister established an economic recovery task force, which is divided by 9 subcommittees tackling every sector, every aspect of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And this task force is a collaboration effort of many representatives from the public and the private sector. And their task, is to come up with a set of recommendations from the government on how to, recover each of these sectors,
Mm-hmm.
either with investments or new policy shift, or incentives or stimulus, and see how it advances. Now the challenge is, how do we ensure that the work that is being done at that economic analysis level is aligned with our own national climate targets and
Goals.
priorities?
Yes.
So there is
Yeah.
still a disconnection. There's still a disconnection that we have to recognize. But Prime Minister Mia Motley is, I think, so eloquent
She
in
is.
always raising that, that, or always giving that reminder of
Yes.
not losing focus on what needs to be done and how
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be done, so we can build better.
Exactly. If you're just joining us, we're speaking to Anaitée Mills, a resilience specialist who has been working in this region in energy and climate change with the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Resources Institute, and governments across Latin America and the Caribbean. She is currently the consultant advisor at the Office of the Prime Minister of Jamaica. And we are discussing the 2020 Great Acceleration and looking at it within the context of the opportunities that COVID has provided us as a region to really rethink the directions in which we're going. We've been talking about government, we've been talking about international agencies, we've been talking about policy, but there is space for private sector, there is space for
Oh yeah.
business to play a role too as well. And so looking at that sector, how are business leaders, how can they seize the opportunity for green growth now as well? What role do they play?
Well, it's I think it's a very important role. By all accounts, the government is not going to be able to solve all the problems. And it's not a realistic expectation to think that the government is going to save the day.
Yeah.
I think it's a collaborative effort, and the private sector has a very critical and important role to play. first, as a business owner, a business operator, or a CEO, you have to take a very careful and deep look into your value chain, into your production, into the type of services that you're offering,
Yeah.
and look into the opportunities. First of all, how they say that you have to change inwards in order to generate
Yes.
change out, right? External change or outwards. I don't know if that's correct, but it's a little bit of taking that self-reflective approach and saying, all right,
To your
so what?
business. Yeah.
Yeah, what's my business? What's my business model? Where the significant emission reductions can come? How can I make it sustainable? How
Yeah.
can I make it greener? And that is the first step into I think getting yourself into the right mindset of green growth.
Yeah.
Then the second step will be, all right, how can I diversify my own business and diversify my services to serve the sustainability and the climate targets, to
Yes.
serve the kind of sustainable and green development that we all want to see? Because there's nothing wrong in green development. On the contrary, everything is good.
Mhm.
I think the worry is always, is this scalable? Is this going to generate enough revenue and profit for me?
Mhm.
And that is kind of the assessment that a CEO or a business operator has to do in order to, again, diversify, change,
Yeah.
adapt, and innovate, so you can, as a business owner, can, attain certain, green or net zero, as we call it,
Mhm.
reduce your emissions as much as possible, and then look into the opportunities on where can I install, how can I make my business energy efficient? How can
Yeah.
I implement renewable energy? How can I do water efficiency? How can I reduce the transportation and the whole value chain of and the emissions, that are generated in that production line? How
Yeah.
can I change, the machinery or the technology that I'm using in order to meet these goals? And
Yeah.
then as you go into that process, I think a lot of people, and I'm being, I'm being optimistic here. CEOs, business operators are going to realize the opportunities that lay ahead and that are, present, and may jump on it. And I think definitely the private sector is the first driver of this, low carbon transformation that we need in the
Yeah.
in the Caribbean and in the world.
I think one of the things that I find quite interesting, and mostly times when persons hear about this kind of stuff, it seems overwhelming because they feel like it involves huge structural changes to their business. It involves pumping a lot of money to change the infrastructure in order to be green and all of those things. But you mentioned very early on in your comments about the value chain and looking at the value chain and looking at each step along the way and how you can make incremental changes, and those incremental changes, they add up. I mean, one very simple example comes to mind. One of our partners, Tricor, they have a big conference every single year, and they spend thousands of dollars on paraphernalia. So, plastic pens, those little things, the things that we all gather and end up, in a little basket somewhere at home that nobody
Yeah.
actually uses, right? And their CEO decided, you know what? We're gonna take the money that we would have usually, done all this paraphernalia stuff with, and we're gonna plant trees. And it was just so simple. It was just one simple decision that had such a great impact, and then they were able to talk about it at the business conference with other businesses, and then other businesses started thinking about, okay, what could I do? So it's little interventions that you can start with. So if you're a business owner and you're listening into this conversation and it feels overwhelming, you can start at every single step. So looking at your strategic outlook, looking at how you can make interventions at every step as a business owner,
Mhm,
and then
mhm,
you can build and scale to the larger things like, your
mhm.
infrastructure and that kind of thing, and you really get to see a difference there.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
as we look at, so we've talked about business, we've talked about government, we've talked about business. Now let's talk about international development agencies. We both have experience. That's how we met, right? We both have
Yeah.
experience working for international development agencies, and we do know that they have a critical role to play. But what role would you say, if you had to put that in a nutshell for us, what role would you say that agencies such as the United Nations and other development agencies, the IDB, etc., have to play in this great climate acceleration?
Well, I think everybody has to go through transformation, and everybody has equally to take a look at how things are done. The banks, the multilateral development banks, have started. The IDB have started when I was working there. Was looking into how to mainstream climate change into different sectors in different activities, focusing on supporting projects that had a strong climate change, component, or that will take on climate change considerations into the design of projects.
Yeah.
So definitely, for example, the MDBs have a critical responsibility to stop financing activities that may be carbon intensive. Now that creates a whole different debate that maybe opens the door for your next living room session. Because we have a Guyana that has just discovered oil.
I
Right?
know, who's just
So
exploded.
who are we to tell Guyana don't use your oil? It's a debate, but there is a difference between supporting a developing country and supporting a developed country that continues to want to pursue carbon intensive activity. There's a difference there. There's a different economic outlook that we have to take in consideration. Then the MDBs also are great conduits of climate finance, of concessional finance, of grant financing, which we're going to need a lot of that in the coming months and years. They also, of course, they're banks, so they have their loans and their other, financial instruments that, can come in handy. I think there's a lot of need to apply innovation in the way financial transactions are being structured. We have to also in governments there's a need to blend finance and being able not to stick to a loan or stick to a certain financial instrument, but bring different aspects of, okay, how can I leverage the private sector? How this project can become a PPP or a public-private partnership? How can I leverage climate finance? How can I bring in, grant and technical assistance? The MDBs are absolutely the best post to help governments, come up with those solutions in order to be able to finance that sustainability that we're talking about, because sustainability and green stimulus requires finance. It requires, investment that in the Caribbean we may not be in the best position to finance, at will or at large, right? So the MDBs, and then we have the United Nations. The United Nations is, this fantastic institution that brings everybody together. This organization that really has spearheaded the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that has, advanced and the dialogue for what we have, for the Paris Agreement that we have today. So accountability is, again, very important. Transparency, and the United Nations is an organization that helps keeping everybody on their toes. You see that Prime Minister Mia Mottley and Prime Minister Andrew Holness participated this morning on a high-level financing event convened by the United Nations as well. So this is their, just as at different levels, you always have somebody, keeping you on your toes. The United Nations does that for our leaders, and that is absolutely critical in moving forward.
It provides that platform, that voice. One of the things that you mentioned, and if there's anybody from the development agencies listening in, definitely how we can be flexible and how we can make projects work for the private sector, for governments as best as possible, and trying to find ways to meet people where they are. I think one of the things that happen with all development agencies is that they're global agencies, and so a lot of their frameworks and structure and everything is meant to cover bases in a multiplicity of countries, and so sometimes things are not applicable. And so for the development agencies, all of them going forward, is looking at the countries, and some of them have, as you said, have already started taking steps in that direction, looking at the countries that they're working in, looking at the circumstances of those countries, looking at what's needed, and then tailoring products to be able to meet those needs in a very fluid way, but also in a very timely way, because we're at a stage now, again, that whole world of acceleration, it's speed, right?
It's all about speed, yeah.
Exactly. And if people feel like things are not moving, what tends to happen is that they have the tendency to kind of fall back into always, if you feel like, okay, I'm waiting for something, it's not happening, but I still need to get other things done. I'm just going to go back to what I'm doing, before.
Yeah.
And so definitely having that flexibility and being able to make things go quickly would definitely be a role for the development agencies.
Yeah. I have heard a lot about, dedicated COVID-19 windows for economic recovery that are being created.
Yes.
Of course, the International Monetary Fund, was the first one in providing that kind of support to the countries, with fiscal and debt repayment flexibility and an injection of the liquidity that our governments need at this point in time in order to respond to the economic and social relief.
Yeah.
That was immediate and done and okay. It's not something that we're not going to pay. we all going to have to pay for it, but at least we know that we have some breather time there.
Well, it was quick, exactly, and
right.
it was what was needed at that point in time.
It's what's needed at the point in time.
Yeah,
so
so
governments take that decision and they go to it, and that is acceptable. That is what's happening. The Prime Minister of Jamaica will first tell you, there is also an importance in maintaining fiscal prudence in debt management, and how to use those resources smartly and wisely. So that is one point that I wanted to make. And then also on the private sector side, as you were talking, I was thinking about, the context in which we met at that time. I was at the IDB and the Climate Change Division, and you're still at WIRRED.
Yeah.
And so we had that opportunity of connecting different players, Walker's Reserve as the fantastic regeneration project that it is today, where it came from. It was a different situation back in the day, and now it's
it was an extractive industry.
It was an extractive industry.
Yeah.
It was an extractive industry because that's what's needed at that point in time.
Exactly.
But I love how the people behind Walkers have change also the mindset and move towards transforming and regenerating the space. And not only that, but also creating this research NGO and think tank like it's WIRRED to create that space for that collaboration between academia, between research, between private sector, and also the Inter-American Development Bank in this case, how bringing all these players together to come up with the solutions, which is going to be needed in moving forward with the green stimulus. Again, is collaboration. There's no excuse for anybody right now in the world not to take a stand, to do something, or to say something, like they say. If you see something, say something, right?
Now is definitely time. And I mean, you said you cannot stress collaboration more right now. I mean, one industry cannot do it alone. If
Yeah.
you are just joining us, we are speaking with Anaitée Mills. She's a resilience specialist, and she's worked across the region in the energy and climate change sectors, with the Inter-American Development Bank, with the World Resources Institute, and with governments across Latin America and the Caribbean. And currently, she is the consultant advisor to the Office of the Prime Minister of Jamaica. And we are talking about the space that COVID has created for us to create a new economy, a new world. Before we go into questions from the audience, actually, let's go into questions from the audience. Let's go into questions from the audience. So if we can have the first question, let's see. All right, this question is from Ria. Hi, Ria.
Hi,
All right,
Ria.
and it says, what other goals other than tree planting are our government setting and working towards to deal with the problem of climate change? For example, in the area of transportation, use of electric buses, use of bicycles. Great question, Ria. Thank you.
Well, we were just talking about that, right? I think transportation is a sector that is absolutely a low-hanging fruit in terms of opportunities for emissions reductions, for creating a better quality of life, for economic growth. You
Yeah.
know, we have road. We were talking about road maintenance and expansion. We have to talk about also traffic efficiency, and energy efficiency as well in traffic, better traffic management, then e-mobility. E-mobility, I think, at least, you know, Barbados is quite expert in the expansion of e-mobility and creating those charging stations, which Jamaica is moving towards to. The IDB actually is working on the framework for the e-mobility, the legal framework for e-mobility development in Jamaica, which we will start to see some movements there to transform the public transportation fleet and make some transformation in commerce as well. Maybe for personal, for personal electric vehicles, that might come later along the line, but definitely the transformation in the public and the residential and the commercial transportation will be key. And then, you know, we were talking about the redesign of road networks and you know how how investments in the network can help also to generate some kind of or better urban organization. So there's opportunities. I think transport is definitely a key sector along with energy.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised to find out from Veronica's segment on Tuesday that we have so many chargers, but that we have more charging stations in Barbados than gas stations, which is amazing.
Amazing,
So
yeah.
the infrastructure is coming into place. And so, you know, the policies that allow both the government but also individual owners to be able to access these things just need to be put in place, you know, to make it affordable for people to be able to do the electric vehicles, because definitely we're accelerating.
Yeah. No, and we know that the acceleration is also highly dependent on policy shift,
Yes.
on tax incentives, on market reforms, on the capacity of the government to say, all right, for us to being able to incentivize and stimulate these investments in these particular and critical sectors, we need to make changes and revisions to policies.
Yes.
Jamaica is going through the, you know, has recently finalized the integrated resource plan for the use of energy sources in moving forward, and how, you know, different, you know, sources are going to be used: wind, solar, you know, natural gas. So diversification again is critical.
It's the key. All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience? All right, so this question is from Shay. Hi, Shay. Hi, Anaitée. I'm guessing
Hi,
that
Shay.
you know her. The accelerated associated with the Industrial Revolution undoubtedly benefited the development of humanity, but also initiated a trajectory towards our current climate crisis. What lessons can we learn from history and apply to the current acceleration period?
Well, I think definitely the lessons learned have to be around implementation. The first lesson is, how these measures and how the decisions that have been taken in the past have been actually implemented. How have they been, facilitated by policy again, and different incentives, and subsidies. The other lesson that we need to take is, how do we use the different players and facilitators and incubators of different measures? How do we bring them into the conversation? How do we also facilitate that discussion between the different players of, in economic growth? And also how the government, or in shaping and crafting these green stimulus packages. We were talking at the beginning, all right, we need to align with the national targets that we have today. Back in the day, back in the Industrial Revolution, the targets were different. Everything was about GDP growth, about economic growth, and industries and work. Nowadays, we have Sustainable Development Goals. We have nationally determined contributions on the Paris Agreement. We have our national development plans, which sets the course of the vision of each of our countries in moving forward. So that economic recovery packages need to be aligned with that. If it's not aligned like it has been before, maybe it's not a silo process. It shouldn't be a silo process in which the status quo or some people take certain decisions and it doesn't align with anything else that is happening in the context of a country or development in general. So that's another lesson learned. And then, also in that collaborative process, we need to include local and municipal authorities, the local government, communities again, so they can get the right guidance coming from the central government into what needs to happen at the local level and the communities, and how that continues to align into sustainable development. Those are three, lessons that I could think of right now. But coming from the 2008 financial crisis, I think the U.S. government, pumped maybe $4 trillion US into the economic recovery, and it was to bail out the financial sector. But it also, in the case of the car making, automotive, how do you say automotive? Automotive industry, there was an incentive for the industry to align with or to incorporate higher efficiency, because that was what the world at that time was needed. And actually, the automotive industry in the United States was lagging behind in comparison to Europe, and they were in crisis. So when the 2008 financial crisis happened, and this stimulus and this, new policies and this alignment into sustainability and higher efficiency came into the automotive industry, they found themselves, forced or encouraged to start producing higher efficient cars, and that saved them. That saved them, and generated jobs, and saved the industry completely, because the industry changed. Now people think twice about what kind of cars they want to buy, whether it's hybrid, whether it's efficient, and those kind of lessons learned. Lessons we have to remind ourselves and remind everybody that there's a co-benefit in investing and aligning recovery plans with climate targets.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Guyana earlier, and one of the things that I'm watching very keenly is to hope that Guyana doesn't go on the same trajectory as Trinidad. I mean, the
Mhm.
map's been laid out. You've seen how we've treated with renewable energy, and we've basically focused on that for years, neglecting all other industries
Mhm.
and not diversifying. And now that Guyana is on this trajectory for development, again, that whole lessons learned process. I mean, it seems like such a simple thing. It literally is like a good project post-mortem, right? You
Yeah.
just look at what has happened in the past and don't make those mistakes again.
Yeah.
But you know, just kind of looking at that and hoping, fingers crossed, that with their trajectory that they are more anyway, that
Yeah.
they look at
Absolutely.
all the different pitfalls that
Yeah.
countries who have had oil and are now in the
Mhm.
situations that they are in right now,
Mhm.
that they don't find themselves in that same
L-
area.
Listen, in hearing you talk about this, I was thinking about the concept of resilient leadership.
Yeah,
So leadership is super important because
yeah.
yes, like we were saying, we're nobody to say Guyana, don't use your oil, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different conversation, and they have their resources, and hopefully, like you said, they'll be able to take better and more holistic decisions on how they want to manage that.
How they
We have
want to.
to we
Yes.
have to trust Guyana that they'll be able, and they'll take in account the disruptions. Yeah,
Yeah.
take in account what's happening, what has happened with other countries next door
Yes.
neighbors, what's happening right now. We saw the collapse of the oil prices back
Mm-hmm.
in, what was it, April? I don't even know what month
I
we
know.
are.
It's
I
so
think it was April, right?
early May. It was early May. It was early May.
Right, right. So we saw the collapse of the oil prices. And if that doesn't tell you something about disruption and
Yes.
about putting again, all your eggs in the same basket,
Yes.
you and Guyana might end up with a lot of stranded assets that may not be used or wanted by anybody in the
Exactly.
future. I'm not jinxing, but
No, but
those
it's
are
being
the kind
real.
of things that they have to think about.
Yes, exactly. All right, let's have another question from the audience. All right, so this question is from a YouTube user. Welcome, our YouTube users. We're really excited for the last 2 weeks to be streaming from YouTube live. So if you're not a Facebook user, you don't have an excuse anymore, right? So this is from Edgewaters. The carbon
Mhm.
emission drop that followed the recession in 2009 was followed by a sharp rise of almost 6% in 2010. Do you think that something similar could happen over the next couple of years?
Listen, I hope not. I hope not, and that's going to be my best answer, because if something like that happens, then we definitely haven't learned anything,
Yeah.
and we don't want to learn. I hope it doesn't happen, and I think that's why we are advocating for green recovery plans and green
Mhm.
stimulus, to avoid that kind of rise in emissions, because we cannot afford it. We have 10 years to meet our to achieve our 1.5 Celsius degrees target, and we cannot you know we cannot allow for an increase in emissions. Now, when I say we cannot allow, I'm talking in a larger human capacity, right? Who am I, right? But but
Well, it's the role, you play an advisory role,
Mhm.
and it's persons such as yourself who have that opportunity to speak to those who are in leadership. And of course, the onus is on those who are in leadership to listen. Again, that whole partnership idea, but
Mhm.
yeah, so yeah,
So yeah,
you.
definitely the response is definitely, we hope. And I think the international community is activating really quickly and being very loud about
Yes,
that, because again, resilient leadership.
yes,
How can we hold our leaders accountable of the decisions that they make today,
yeah.
that can place us in a better or worse position in moving forward in the future? I hope that, by listening and participating in these webinars, in these discussions at all levels, because I see everybody going online these days, the ideas are being shared and exchanged. And again, the Caribbean is its own, it has its own context, its own realities.
Yes.
And we can only hope that our governments and our leaders are going to take the right decisions.
Exactly. All right, we have time for one more question. So we're going to take that last question. And this is from Andrew. Hi, Andrew. Will IDB sponsor the design of digital public awareness to promote green mindsets across the globe?
I think, I think the IDB, in my experience, is an organization, along with other organizations that are very active in knowledge exchange, in encouraging and empowering that kind of public awareness that is necessary for climate change. This also, what we are doing today is a perfect example. And it will be the answer to your question, Andrew. Today's living room session was powered by the IDB, and I think that shows a lot of. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the institution, of course, but that shows a lot of intention, and it shows what the institution wants to do in terms of public awareness. So the answer is why not?
Sounds good. Well, Anaitée, it has been amazing speaking to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time and talking to us, chatting with us. Definitely, I know that we will continue to have these discussions offline because there is definitely so much to learn. I encourage our listeners today, please dive into the great acceleration rabbit hole. It is so much to learn. But I think as an informed person, you can then make informed decisions. And you made the point of persons holding their leaders accountable. So persons tend to think, oh well, the leaders need to do X, Y, Z, but you put the leaders there. At least for most countries, for democratic, you put the leaders there, but you can't make informed decisions if you don't know what's going on. And so, for some persons, they have a little bit of enforced downtime. For others, maybe not. But just making that effort to get on top of the issues and see what's going on and see where you as an individual can make small changes within your life, right? So you can make small incremental changes within your life. As a business person, looking at where you can take small incremental changes within your business. And I don't think it would be remiss of me to say this, that for a lot of those changes that you can make as a business person, it actually saves you money, like right off the bat. Getting rid of some wasteful practices, it actually saves you money without you having to invest anything. It's just making a decision.
We didn't talk. I'm sorry.
To do something different. But to do something different.
We didn't talk about the cost of resiliency and how it can come across as a high cost at the start, but it just makes more sense in the long run. We in the Caribbean, these countries are high in debt because we have only focused on the recovery after natural disasters and going into debt, taking on loans to recovery. What if instead of depending on the economic and the saving grace of international organizations, we start just financing and investing in resilience today, so the debt eventually can go down as we all want it to go down. Economic growth can finally, start going up. And then the quality of life, and we can see our governments make the investments that are needed to improve our quality of life. Resilience might be high cost or might not be high cost today, it depends. But in the long term, it absolutely makes sense.
It works out. It's like buying a good quality pair of sneakers instead of a crap sneakers, and not having to buy sneakers every 3 years, but having to buy one every 6 months, and you're still spending a lot of money. It's I think if we can get people to understand it in those very basic concepts, but that's what it is. It's investing, now for something that's going to definitely be a great return on investment.
Yeah.
So Anaitée, thank you so much. Oh, we're out of time.
Thank you, Kiesha. Yes.
But it's been a great conversation. Thank you for spending your time with us, and continue with your good work.
Yes, likewise. Greetings to Barbados. I love Barbados, and I hope you guys continue with this fantastic work on connecting people and generating these spaces. Much love to Barbados. Keep safe, and we'll talk soon.
Yes, talk soon. Okay, bye. So thank you very much for joining us. If you missed any part of today's session, you can catch it on WIRRED's YouTube channel. Remember, it is as easy as click and subscribe, or you can catch it on our Facebook page or CPRI's Facebook page. Join WIRRED's Living Room session again on Tuesday, the 2nd of June at 1 p.m. as CPRI's Jen Ward-Clark. She speaks with permaculture design course graduates Fiona Roach from Guadeloupe, Mia Talbot from the British Virgin Islands, and Cecilia Moore right here from Barbados, as they talk about how the PDC has enhanced not only their careers, but really have changed their lives. And then join me again on Thursday the 4th of June at 1 p.m. while I speak with Dr. Justin Ram. He's a global resilience economist, educator, and consultant about the role that renewable energy can play in reducing economic vulnerabilities and diversifying our economies. So we look forward to having you join us next week. And even if you can't join us, remember we have recordings. You can go onto our YouTube channel and check us out there. Thank you for joining us.